Hello and welcome to the panel discussion on disruption in food supply chains in the Asia-Pacific region. My name is Elizabeth Lanchowski-Holmes and I am a first-year MBA student at Tuck. I'd like to introduce the panelists for this discussion. Rob Hulme is the Asia Director at Beanstalk AgTech, which aims to bridge and scale disruptive agri-food technology to help reinvent this food system across Asia-Pac. He's also the CEO of Borealis Group, which is an agribusiness advisory firm. Rob has over 28 years experience in research and extension, marketing, operations, and BD, M&A, technology licensing, and innovation. Previously, Rob worked with Bayer Crop Science in Asia as the country division head of Vietnam and Cambodia, country head and CEO of Greater China, and head of BD and innovation of Asia Pacific based in Singapore. Next, I'd like to introduce Stefan Edkins. He's the founder and CEO of Rice Exchange, which is a global digital rice trading platform with an integrated supply chain solution. Rice Exchange is a sponsor of our AgTech Summit, so thank you, Stefan. He is an experienced entrepreneur and angel investor with interests in agriculture and renewable energy. He's passionate about investing in technology that has been developed in and can be applied to developing countries. Stefan, who is an Oxford-trained economist, started his career in finance with a focus on emerging markets. In 2004, he founded a VC firm in Shanghai focused on clean energy and made 2 successful IPO exits on the London Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. He became interested in the global rice trade when assessing the cost of importing rice into Nigeria. Lastly, I'd like to introduce Siang. He is the director of CropLife Asia, which promotes the benefits and responsible use of crop protection and plant biotechnology products, as well as sound regulatory frameworks to support sustainable agriculture development in the Asia-Pac region. Previously, Siang was the CEO of HLH Agriculture International, working on ag development, cultivation, merchandising, and distribution of agriculture commodities. He worked with Siang, a Malaysia-based multinational company involved in agribusiness. Siang holds a PhD and Master's of Science in Molecular Biology. With that, I'd like to offer a quick reminder to put your questions in the Ask a Question box at the bottom of the panel on the screen and vote on your favorite questions. We'll cover them at the end of the session. I'll pass it off to my panelists. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So welcome everyone to this session around the world. Welcome here from Singapore. It's a slightly early start for us over here, but we're really glad to be here and glad to have my fellow panelists, Siang and Stefan. So we want to just touch for the next 40 minutes or so in and around Asia Pacific. As many of you may or may not know, Asia Pacific frames up around 48 countries. It's home actually to over 5 billion of the world's population. So I think by 2050 it'll be close to 60%, but a lot of that is aging. So by 2050, 60%, 30% of the population will be over 60 years old. It's got a huge diversity of culture and geography and religion and GDP, and already actually experiences lots of disruption to food supply with droughts and famines and shortages across a huge demographic. And so food security for Asia Pacific has sort of long been in focus for the governments that make up the cluster. And so obviously the word of the day is COVID-19 and the disruption that brings in and really highlights the complexity and perhaps fragility of the food system, and particularly in Asia Pacific, where that supply chain or that value chain is quite complex. So we thought after talking with Stefan and Siang today, we would touch on three key themes. Basically, what does disruption look like in Asia Pacific? What are the outcomes as we adjust to this new normal? And perhaps where are some opportunities for investment in Asia Pacific? So let's start from the top and just try and frame up or give our listeners or our audience a sense of what does disruption look like. And in terms of food production, Siang, there are, I think, upwards of 500 million smallholder farmers across the Asia Pacific region already facing really big challenges. So what is COVID-19 meant for these guys?
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for having me on the panel. I just want to reiterate what you just said. 85% of the world's smallholder farmers, about 522 million, are called Asia home, and they produce 80% of the food consumed for Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So that alone, with an average income of $2 per day for the farmers, with this disruption, it's going to be very challenging. In a sense, there are multi-phases to this. So I just want to also set the tone that we are not going to be able to give all the answers, but let's look at on the bigger picture, how agriculture is going to affect not only the farming community because of the lockdown. People will need the farming, the whole value chain will have to readjust or recalibrate of where they're going to deliver the produce to in the market. Right now, there's massive disruption from border restrictions. Only last couple of weeks, we had our first flight of food being shipped from Perth out to Singapore. This is through the multilateral. So over the last 30 days or so, borders have closed, air cargo cannot ship. We cannot move between trans-border between Malaysia, Singapore, and many other places. So how does food going to go out? That's issue number one. Number two, with movement control and the lockdown, how does the farmer is going to go out to work? Because they need to go out to, a lot of early assumptions, food can move. But they forgot that farmers have to go out and start planting, taking care of their producers before they can get into the market, number one. Number two is with the shift in consumerism, in the sense that the restaurants are all shut down. Immediately you see a dislocated supply chain. The produce that are supposed to go to the restaurants are now dislocated. They need to find new avenues to be able to supply those. And because of this disruption, farmers are, what Rob said also, you are seeing a lot of produce being discarded, etc. And that will put tremendous liquidity as farmers, because they earn only $2 a day. Can you imagine they destroying their producers, not able to sell their product out into the market, will cause one whole dramatic change in terms of food security, nutrition security for the farmers itself. Number two is these farmers are unsuccessful, be able to produce. The consumer of us, the so-called the urban person who does not farm, you look at mega cities like Delhi, Shanghai, 23 million, nobody farms. If those producers are not being produced in a timely manner, be able to get into the supply chain and be able to maintain an acceptable cost fluctuation, that will what will happen with the affordability of food in larger cities. So it's a double whammy, both at the farming side and also as a consumer. So you're going to get price escalation. I think Stefan, you're going to talk about the rice price escalation, etc. But this is a real thing. We are not talking about rice alone. We are talking the whole, from vegetables down to the lentils and etc. So this is just to set the tone how this COVID-19 will impact from the planting itself and getting, with the lockdown, so getting produce back end, inputs from fertilizers, seeds, and a crop protection product into the hands of farmer at the correct time, because North Asia is now planting, just like the US is all sowing season. So can you imagine if the Northern Hemisphere doesn't get enough input to start planting, we'll lose the whole planting season.
Yeah, is that specifically Siang, in terms of, is it inputs in terms of crop protection products and seed? I mean, you represent the peak body of the multinationals across Asia Pacific, or is it as much around labour? I mean, it's a huge intensity of labour, and so if farmers are not able to get access to labour for farming operations, is that having a big impact?
Yep. And because the borders, people cannot come over. Even in Australia or in New Zealand, every year you get migrant workers to come in to help pick the fruits and etc. So that is a massive, because not only collectors are harvesters, we have to have packing people to be able to work in the value chain. Even today, the port is operating at a very low capacity because the migrant workers are not there to move the cargo. So we have seen ports cargoes being stacked up tremendously because there's lack of workers. So that's a massive dislocation, and especially for agriculture, it's very, very perishable. Whether it's on the cold chain or drying. So there's a whole lot of dislocation. So that's why my first my first point is everybody has to recalibrate how we do business, how we go to market, and also how do we support farmers in the new predictability of what to plant and when to plant and what is the new demand like.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Stefan, for you, I mean, in terms of the rice supply chain, which you're deeply involved in, of course, globally, but somehow here in Singapore, it's possibly the hub globally of the rice trade, or that's the focus area. What are the impacts that you're seeing? I mean, specifically, let's talk for a minute specifically around rice. Either on price or supply, or ripple effects onto other continents such as Africa.
Singapore is the global.
No, you're good. No, you're good. Off.
Singapore is the global hub for rice trading, and that's why we're a Singapore company. We have a team all over the world, in 10 different countries, and luckily, as a company, we've been relatively unaffected because we've always been very distributed. It's a digital company. We're used to working via video conferences. But that's not true of our clients. There's been disruption, as you already mentioned, at ports. There's been disruption in just simple things like sending documents. So if you can't send a FedEx with a bill of lading, then that suddenly becomes a massive issue. And then on the demand side, because we have clients in 70 countries around the world, we see both the exporters and the importers. And on the demand side, demand is going up. People are hoarding in many cases. It's a staple which I think is particularly demanded in times like this. We've seen the price of rice globally rise by about 35% over the last 12 months. That's in dollar terms. So in local currency terms, the increase has been even more dramatic. We've had calls from mills in Central America who are unable to get hold of any rice, and it's a staple diet there, right? And they're natural importers of rice. So it's not just an Asia problem; it's a global problem. And there's no magic wand in times like this. I mean, we can't do anything about the fact that Vietnam blocks imports periodically. Okay, but what we can do is help people to get quickly alternative supplies. Right, we make it easier for people to switch their supply lines from one country to the other. We make it easier for them to adjust if there's been a delay at port, to helping to reduce things like demurrage. We allow for electronic document transfer, so people don't have to wait for the FedEx to arrive. These are all things which are helping in these circumstances. But what it really goes back to is something that you already touched on, which is, although the price of rice has gone up by 35%, and consumers are paying more money, so consumers are suffering, the actual producers of rice are not necessarily making any more money. In fact, they're making less. All right. So what we have is a lot of costs in the middle, and that ultimately no one really benefits from that. I mean, I think I don't know what percentage of rice you think is effectively going to get wasted here, but I think it's pretty high. And so if you have more transparency in the supply chain, if you have better communication between the different participants, I think everybody ultimately is going to benefit from that. And that's why we've got buy-in, not just from producers of rice and buyers of rice, but also some of the other service providers, so shipping lines, insurance companies, and inspection companies and banks all see the advantage of having a trusted marketplace where they can get much better visibility about what's going on.
So they see that. So they see that it's more of a risk mitigation, not just on default on delivery, but also on insurances and shipping platforms and from finance.
Exactly. Ultimately, risk is cost. All right. High risk means high cost. It means higher insurance. It means higher cost of financing. It all gets passed on. All right.
Yeah.
It either means the consumer pays more, or the producer gets less. And so, the key to increasing transparency, or the key to reducing risk, is increasing transparency, and that's what we're all about.
Okay, so I mean, obviously, Siang, from a sovereign perspective for countries, rice is, I think it's possibly up to 50% of the household income spent on food. So it's a huge impact. If you've got one of the staple products like rice, inflation potentially becomes a big concern. I mean, how are countries in Asia Pacific reacting to supply and trade of rice? Are you on mute?
Crop in it. Sorry, can you hear me?
Are you right? Yep, you can.
Yeah. So it's a core crop across whole of Asia Pacific, from Vietnam, Thailand, etc. So the government has done immediate reaction to it by providing direct subsidies or assistance to farmers, and those are in billions of dollars. For example, Thailand last week also says every farmers get a few thousand baht per farmer in Thailand. Bangladesh, Indian government put in $22 billion direct for farmers. Indonesian government have put in money. Malaysia government has set up a strategic food security council, all to drive and secure and also limit the impact of food security disruption, and also farmers' ability to continue to do farming. So there are, just like all the stimulus package, and all of them have core agriculture component in order to stabilize it. Because, as again going back to Stefan, the prices we are seeing significant trend, not only on rice increasing, but the other what they call vegetables and etc. needs to be protected also, because those are very short cycle. Yes, it may be a bit more easy in terms of elasticity of price demand, but essentially the farmers will need to have certain level of comfort in order to have input price control, so that he can farm and collect the money in order not for him to get out of business. So it's a massive, because you're not looking at one farmer with 10,000 hectares, you're looking at one farmer with 2 hectares or 0.5 hectares. So the large number that needs help. Again, from before the COVID, all of them have climate change problems already. Now they're double whamming up on it with climate change, drought and etc. We lost whole of northern Thailand last year because of drought. We lost few 100,000 hectares of rice in Vietnam because of salinization. So this is going to be more challenging for farmers to even ranch up its productivity as last year.
And in terms of trade and export, I think Vietnam, for a period of time, closed their border and caused quite some disruption, certainly within the ASEAN region. If growers don't make the monsoon, or if there's some sort of major reduction in planting to the monsoon, how do you think that the countries will react to that?
So between this, learning up from 2007 and 8, ASEAN Plus 3 has already created a buffer or a storage program that is shared among the ASEAN country. But again, everybody says, I have 2.5 months. That is 110 days or 130 days. And with Asia, with so many million of people, that 2.5 months of supply will evaporate almost instantaneously if we lose a major country's output, or even a reduction by X%. That will have not a ripple impact, but I wouldn't say a tsunami, but a shock wave across availability of basic nutrition and basic food for the vast commodity.
Do you think that some countries, there's a question actually here from Jessica, have some countries been able to handle supply chain disruptions better than others during this COVID situation? So between perhaps the countries like Hong Kong and Singapore, which have a higher GDP, perhaps can afford to air freight food into the country versus say Bangladesh or some other countries with a lower GDP. Do you see differences in how from that sovereign or how the countries are operating?
I think on a large scale basis, our position for ASEAN and many other countries is to ensure borders doesn't close, continue to pledge for open trade. This is why we had a signing between Australia, New Zealand, Myanmar. 8 countries came together a few weeks ago to sign a pledge that food trade should not stop. This is very crucial to provide both political sound messaging to the multi-stakeholders that to stop hoarding. What you said, Stefan, just now, the moment you start hoarding too much, you will only go into a economic destability, price panic. Even supermarkets, not only tissue papers that is running out of shelf, but basic food necessity will create more turmoil and cause price increase essentially and disruption. So that's why by providing open borders for food to move provides that stability and correct messaging. And behind the scene is to then help the farmers to make sure that they can continue to produce under safe environment. I'll talk about safe environment for farmers later on with you when we come to that piece. Yeah, but that is crucial. They are the front line, as important as the nurses and doctors.
Maybe, Rob, I just add to that. The fact that we have this crisis with Corona doesn't mean that all the other problems go away. The impact of water shortages, the different harvests, the potential for typhoons later in the season. These are all things which you need a robust and flexible supply chain in order to be able to deal with. A good example of that would be something like Egypt. They started building a dam at the upper reaches of the Nile, and the amount of water that Egypt had was dramatically reduced. They were previously self-sufficient in rice, and now they have to start importing. That's not going to stop. They need to be able to meet that demand, and they need to have the flexibility to find the rice from where it's available.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we just move on to that next theme, which is expected outcomes in this new normal somehow. And you could argue, as we mentioned before, that Asia Pacific and in particular the smallholder farming population is adapting to crises from salinity to drought to market disruption for a while. But if you think about countries in Siang, closer to home here in Singapore, from a government response, I know food security has been in focus for a number of years, given the small size of the country, and they have recently, as last year, launched the 30 by 30 strategy, where 30% of food production, aiming for 30% of food production by 2030, and currently it's 10%. How do you see governments in this new normal responding to food security challenges?
I think this is again a good opportunity for us to leverage on technology. I think let's hopefully, whether it's digital in agriculture, whether digital in the sense of drone, digital application, remote sensing, etc. I think this is an opportunity for government to really look at the toolbox and also the range of technology that is available for new technology to be adopted, which is digital agriculture, new crops and seeds. We have new plant breeding innovation coming out from CRISPR-Cas. Those are already deployed in the US, but we need functional regulatory system to be able to deploy them into Asia. Even the private sector and the public sectors have come up with various seed technology. We need those quickly to be able to deploy out and get them into the hands of farmers. So I think this is a time that the government will come together and assess what technology do I need whether it's from irrigation technology, whether it's greenhouse technology, farm input technology. A whole platform needs to be upgraded, even down to the very basic, what we said, what's our post-harvest system available to conserve and be able to preserve even the rice, get it dried up correctly, packet them, and then get into the port, because port is delayed. So the whole value chain has now the opportunity with the government back-end support. Let's look at technology is available. How can we step up that technology? Unlike, don't leave it with the old technology, or farmers will be there, they can air dry or sun dry, but this is a golden opportunity when, you've been in the ag space, the technology setup, you look at Bangladesh, the application in terms of telephone, this is where the rubber hits the road. And over the last couple of weeks, we are seeing farmers going direct to consumer. They're connecting direct, I'm selling direct. So again, cutting down, become transparency. We are narrowing the middle ground between consumer. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, but the regulatory environment needs to be correct in order for us to deploy.
Yeah. So, I mean, we just touched on briefly around digitization of the supply chain, and things that are perhaps not so sexy as, documentation, bills of lading. What do you see, Stefan, through Rice Exchange? I mean, you've obviously seen lots and lots of different systems and processes. Is it really a barrier to trade? Is it as bad as what it seems, or is there sort of a light at the end of the tunnel for finding better ways, more efficiencies in that?
Well, I mean, in terms of the new normal, this is a classic situation where if a boat was kept up in port, or you weren't even sure whether it was being delivered by the trucks, it would be common for you to either fly in personally or send someone locally to go and see what was going on. That's suddenly no longer possible. All right. So you have to trust in an alternative source of information, an alternative source of data. And I think, you mentioned technology, and this is really ultimately you're relying on technology to replace the typical forms of doing business. And that started out with a handshake, a conference. That's all pretty much over now. You have to trust in the inspection that's on the ground. You have to trust in the documents that you've been sent, that they're originals. You need to have the tools to guarantee that you can trust in that, without being able to actually be on the ground yourself or have people on the ground. And I think once we've got those in place, and once people get used to using them, and they're actually starting to move quite fast. So we've seen, for instance, banks are quite rapidly moving towards accepting paper documents. Accepting digital documents when they had really been holdouts for many, many years. And now there are no paper documents. There's no choice. And so we've seen a dramatic step change in acceptance of digital documents just in the last 3 months.
Yeah. So I guess that brings a new level of or opportunities around transparency. And if you think about offline to online and B2C platforms, where we see also huge shift for even farmers, and that provenance connection, coordinating direct sales to consumers. What do you think, Siang, in terms of the ability of the rural and regional communities to organise and establish or take advantage of these digital platforms?
Well, that is definitely the in thing right now. Just before even I go down that topic, it's just that if we are seeing governments now escalating or hastening the adaptation of e-submission of regulatory documents, from renewal of permits on the ground. So right now, the whole digital economy will now shift. Getting Rob, you submit your permit, whether your port permit application, your phytosanitary, everything is now done online. So we're really working very closely to get that system up and running in countries, and even down to the basic of your retail certificate, etc. is all renewal. So under e-commerce. So I think that's where that the digitization of the government is now expedited, so to speak. So on the farmer side, because of the movement control, you still now have to reach out to farmers who are on a mobile base, and that has escalated tremendously from farmer training to getting technology. So if you look at Indonesia, everybody has two to three phones, and now there's an opportunity to look at what can we do with the older phones and the new high-tech phones that they have, and what our messaging can go in, short messages, etc. So over the last 1-2 months, especially on China itself, starting February, March, everything reaching out to farmers were all through social media platform or dedicated connection with it. So this is going to be a new norm. The old marketing, you get all the farmers sitting on 100 people in the room and talk about the product. It is evaporating very rapidly because of the movement control. So you need to find new ways to connect with the farmers, and vice versa for a purchaser to talk to the farmers. When can I come and deliver? How do I pay you? The whole digital payment system has also changed.
Right. Yeah. And so just maybe keeping on that technology theme, I mean, we've seen lots of discussion, different market adoption for GM crops globally, and also in different parts of Asia. Previous panels during the conference have talked about, obviously, a lot of talk around plant proteins and the adoption of plant proteins, and even cellular agriculture. From a food security perspective for Singapore, it's obviously one of the core pillars, along with vertical farming and aquaculture. So how would you see the adoption of plant proteins and cellular agriculture across Asia Pacific specifically, and perhaps referencing some of the developments for Beyond and Impossible?
So I think, Beyond and Impossible just had a core contract signed for China. They're getting a distributorship through Starbucks and etc. So, but this is only a fraction of the food security answer, or a changing diet because of your meat products and etc. So that is only depending on the affordability of you to be able to buy food and your personal choice and etc. But for the larger Asia of the few billion people, both China and India, that alone is 2.2 billion people. What is the affordability like? So for technology-wise, yes, across Asia, everybody is moving into whether it's hydroponic, aeroponic, vertical farming, farming under clean room with LED. This is a good point, because this is where the safety of farmers, because you're working in a clean room environment, the farmers are protected, your yield is much more control for pests and disease. Yes, this is where the new frontier is going to be, in a sense of taking care of farmers, because right now, as you go out, the farmers' age of Asian farmers are 65 and above, vulnerable age group. You're exposing your farmers outside, and we are seeing problems that harvesters don't want to come and work because I'm not having sufficient PPE. Today, we are having a PPE challenge between frontline people who need it in the hospital, and how do we have PPE for farmers who is working out in the field. They need to be protected also. So with your technology, with the indoor farming, vertical, etc., this gives a sufficient level of protection to the farmers in order. But that is only a small fraction of the productivity or the food sustainability that we need to produce in the supply chain. I can't bring rice into vertical farming. So back to the core question, we still need to protect that group of farming, and then to protect the larger rice stability, the affordability, and etc. So we have one fraction with high technology that will move as we new genetics, new crops, we will adapt under that environment.
Okay,
so
that's
a different discussion.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good segue into the last theme around looking at opportunities for investment in Asia Pacific. And you've touched on technology, so drones, which has been very successful, of course, in China and Japan, and there's a big push for adoption. And then looking at what you're doing, Stefan, in digitization and essentially blockchain-enabled technology, but to take a lot of costs and complexity out of the system. I mean, how do you see? What's the appetite, do you think, for this transition and the investment from companies to adopt these new technologies?
Yeah, my view is that what it's doing is accelerating trends which already existed. Not just in agriculture, but we're seeing, in education, in fintech, we're seeing trends which people have started investing in 10 years ago, now really starting to come to fruition. I give you a very good example of that. Electronic bills of lading have been around for 20 years already. And for much of that time, basically, they couldn't get adopted. And now it's just starting to happen. And I think that the same thing with, our platform. What we have as a platform is not something that anybody in Wall Street would be surprised to see. Being able to have a load of data, charts about where rice is going, what type of rice. This is all stuff which, from a technology perspective, has been possible for quite a long time, but it needed adoption. And we're now able to provide that level of information to the people that really need it. Everybody's going to get access. Everybody's going to find out which areas have a surplus of rice, which areas need it, and hopefully fill that gap a lot quicker.
And how does that translate? Let's talk about still on rice, but other crops. But how does that translate back to, Siang? He's focused on farmers. You see that that's going to have an upstream impact on better prices for farmers.
I think it comes with mechanization. That's something that I want to allude to also. In larger scale of Asia, where everybody in the whole village will come together, we're going to plant together, we'll harvest together. This is again, we'll have more transplanter coming in, more combined harvester coming in. That will be given a lot of efficiency and cost efficiency in the long term, and then that's where the technology piece, and everybody will be adopting it at a much more quicker pace than last couple of years ago. And also especially planters, right now there's a new opportunity for us to get planting being automated, harvesting at much more larger scale. So a lot of opportunity, a lot of efficiency coming through.
So it's not typically, just to close it out, it's not typically the lack of innovation or technology, it's the adaptation of good agricultural practice and existing investment, so capital.
Yep. Correct.
Okay. And Stefan, we've got a question here asking around other crops for the Rice Exchange platform. Obviously, you're hyper-focused on rice and in the middle of a launch program that's coinciding with the pandemic. And I guess that's quite a bit of pressure for the team. But do you see that building out and applying the same sort of systems and processes to other commodities or cash crops?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that what we developed with Fujitsu, who are our technology partner, and our integration partners. So I mentioned them earlier: shipping, insurance, inspection, and banks. These are processes which are applicable not even just to other commodities, but a lot of areas of trade. And so, when we speak to them, we know that what we're working on together is something that they see applications. The service providers are the ones who are asking us that question more than anybody, right? Where would we go with this next? But I think right now the task we have with rice is big, and it's exciting, and it's important. And we'll maybe ask ourselves that question sometime next year.
Yeah. Okay. One other question here, which is relevant for both of you, around creating platforms to facilitate adoption of varieties. Perhaps Siang through IRI, through the International Rice Research Institute, or local varieties which are more resilient to, say, submergence, so sub-tolerant varieties, or salinity. Is Rice Exchange together with CropLife, is that a platform that can help farmers grow those varieties and adapt, in particular to what we're seeing in climate change with countries in particular like Vietnam and the Mekong Delta?
I think each of the national first component is the public sector is very, very advanced in both the genetics and coming up with new varieties that are both adapted to the local weather, salinity, etc. That piece is already very advanced in the sense that every year you see new varieties coming out. But what we want to see is newer technology, apart from hybrid rice, is whether genome editing, new variety of crops are coming in at a much faster pace with CRISPR-Cas that we can utilize. But that again, going back, is that with the technology available, we have varieties that are already on test run, not only in rice, but various others. But is the regulatory environment conducive for the delivery? Farmers want new technology. They want to have more environmental resilient crops to help protect their risk. Just again, like Stefan said, risk is a cost. So they want to make sure their crops that they sow are able to harvest at the end point. So we need to work very closely with government to make sure that the regulatory environment continues to be functional and innovative and accepting of newer technology at a much more quicker pace.
Yeah.
Can I just,
and maybe just to close it out, I mean, we've just got a couple of minutes, but Stefan, if you'd like to maybe give us your takeaway, and in particular, what the impact through rice exchange, and then Siang, we can flick over to you.
I'd first up say it's a pleasure to meet you, Siang, because we clearly have a number of touch points in common. So I'm hoping we might actually be able to do something together. You were just talking about the fact that there are so many varieties of rice. We already have over 300 varieties on our platform. And that number is growing, almost on a monthly basis. And I think one of the things that we've seen is consumers around the world are so much more appreciative of the value of the food. But also they're paying a lot more attention to it. They want to know, where it came from. They want to try new varieties. They want to have that, they want to, like you were saying earlier, they want to become master chefs, right? And so they're really taking an interest. They're reading the packs. They want to know where the rice came from. And that goes back to the theme around not just transparency, but traceability and data. And do I know where the rice came from? And if I know where the rice came from, is the farmer that grew it getting a fair wage or not? I think that's the goal that we're both really focused on.
And then just to close that out, there's a question, talking about sustainability and how Rice Exchange potentially can promote sustainability, and that in of itself is promoting a sustainable rice trade platform, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in two ways. So one, just by having digital settlement, you don't have to have people flying around the world. You don't need to be sending FedEx around the world. You can do that all digitally. I think that's sustainable straight away. But also, we will have special certification on our platform for sustainably produced rice. We will allow people to check that certification, and they will be able to buy from suppliers that have that correct, have the right certificate. But also, we work with the inspection companies to guarantee that the rice actually came from that farm. We need to do all of those things.
Yeah. And Siang, your takeaway?
Yeah. So my takeaway is we need to work very closely with governments, because this so-called start-stop situation will not go away until there is a proper vaccine, better cure for this problem. But the main thing is that we need to work very closely with the government, is to make sure that agriculture is not just in time. Agriculture cannot be just in time, just like any plastic material. You push the button, 6 months later, you get an order to your door. This is much more complex, and agriculture is very fragile, coming from sustainability, from environmental issues. So we need to have more collective and cohesive way to protect the value chain, and working with governments and through multi-governments is very, very crucial at this period. So again, calling out to have good, clear green passes for agriculture value chain, from import, transport to inputs, all the way to delivering up to a fair value or a correct, affordable, sustainable food system across the world, not only Asia, because this is not going to, the new norm is not going to be normal.
Yeah,
thank you.
And that's a perfect way to close out. So thank you very much, both of you, for joining. Elizabeth, back over to you.
Thank you so much, Rob, Stefan, and Siang. I really appreciate all your insights. I'm going to pass it off to our next speaker. We have a keynote by Francisco Jardim on empowering extraordinary entrepreneurs. Thank you so much.